Morning everyone, I'm Soph, these are my notes, there they are, and here's the thing, right? It's conservatively estimated that at least 65 million people worldwide have long COVID. And I don't know about you watching this, but if you've seen any of the anecdotal evidence from people with long COVID, it, to me at least, is terrifying. It was first brought to my attention by Diana Cohen, aka Physics Girl, as she shared her experience on social media. This includes posts about being completely exhausted, still being impacted by long COVID over 8 months after her initial infection. Hi everyone, Edit Sophie here from my flat that I'm literally moving out of today, hence the emptiness and the echoiness. I just wanted to update about Diana because I recorded this video in late February, now it's late March. In early March, an update video was posted on her channel about the condition of her health. Essentially, things had got really serious. She'd had to go to the emergency room a couple of times, she couldn't feed herself, her condition had become potentially life-threatening, and this is all because her long COVID has triggered something called chronic fatigue syndrome, which I talk about a bit more later in this video. But yeah, even if you don't know Diana, if you've never followed her content, that video can be a really good place to see the impact long COVID can have on people. I've linked it below, and also on that video there's a link to Diana's Patreon page if you want to support her while she's unwell. Now that video was early March. There was another update later in March saying that she wasn't going to the emergency room anymore, so her condition had improved slightly, but it was still very, very serious. You know, she's in bed all day, she's struggling to do much. She can't even read text messages, for example. So yeah, I've posted a link to her channel below which has those updates on it. But this is the thing, with life seemingly returning to normal for many, those with long COVID often feel left behind in some nightmare. So in this video, I wanted to highlight long COVID, its existence, its symptoms, and their potential causes. And in the second half of this video, I'll ask if the research world is actually paying attention to what is really a debilitating disorder. There's a lot to unpack, so I'll put chapters that you can skip to and buckle up. The symptoms. One of the things that makes long COVID almost unbelievable and often unbearable is the long list of symptoms associated with it. Not every person gets every one, but one of the most commonly reported is post-exertional malaise, or PEM for short. And it's actually the reason that I'm doing this video in a slightly different style to normal, if you haven't noticed. Post-exertional malaise is when you feel unwell after exerting yourself. And by unwell, I mean completely exhausted, unable to do anything at all. Different people have different amounts of energy they can use up before this exhaustion hits. But because doing anything requires some amount of energy, essentially everything has the potential to reach a level where it oversteps that boundary. From going to a walk to sitting up in bed too long. Mental exertion counts too, concentrating hard on work, texting friends, or even listening to someone talk. And what triggers post-exertional malaise varies from person to person. What one person may be fine with, another may find sets it off. There's a great podcast hosted by Natasha Lippman called The Rest Room, which I recommend you listen to, and it's all about people's experiences of chronic illnesses. In the episode on post-exertional malaise, Professor Todd Davenport says that often for his patients, even listening to a voice that's fluctuating a lot is really tiring for them, so he tries to speak in a more monotone way. Now, I took a little bit of inspiration from that, which is why this video is in a more mellow style. I'm trying to speak a bit more monotonously. I probably will be slipping out of that in places, but yeah, that's why I'm not kind of bouncing around as much as I might normally. Just to add here, obviously people with really severe post-exertional malaise and chronic fatigue won't even be able to watch this video, but at the time of recording I just kind of thought, well, every little helps, so hopefully it helps a little bit. Also, I'm aware that I've got a lot of like drawings and doodles which make it more tiring to watch, but if you are finding it tiring to watch, feel free to just listen to the audio. I mean, you don't need my permission to do that, but feel free to do that. One of the weirdest things about PEM though is how delayed it happens. The post in post-exertional malaise means after, and it means quite a while after. You can exert yourself and reach your limit and then only feel the effects 24 to 48 hours later. This is a nightmare because you don't know if you've reached your limit until you crash potentially 2 days later, so it's so difficult to do things within your energy means because you have no idea what your energy means are. You might think you've played it safe and then really suffer the consequences. What's worse is that the more you crash, the lower your threshold for crashing becomes. To go back to Diana for a moment, a while ago she shared a tweet about how she thought that she was being as relaxed as possible. She was listening to chill music and YA audiobooks at 0.8 times speed in a dark room. Then the next day, she crashed hard. For people with PEM, every time they do anything that requires some energy, it's a gamble as to whether it will screw them over later. It sounds almost unbelievable, and as they say in the restroom, to doctors who aren't familiar with it, it kind of is. What's more unbelievable still is, as I said before, the huge list of reported symptoms that people with long COVID can have. We've suspected that COVID infections have the potential to impact a lot of different organs for a long time. I even talk about it in a video I made in 2020. And I also say this:
many people will have the virus and not experience a single symptom. Many people will have the virus and recover and then feel healthy and fine. But many people will not.
Which is pretty interesting in this context. But anyway, in this review paper published on Lucky Friday the 13th of January this year, 2023, we see the extent of all the reported symptoms of long COVID as they're brought together in this diagram. The paper this image is taken from is particularly interesting because 2 of the 4 authors are from a group called the Patient-Led Research Collaborative, and that's a group of people with long COVID who've taken it upon themselves to research the disorder and campaign for policy decisions with the patient in mind. And I think it's a pretty clear sign that something's up when the very people experiencing brain fog and frequent exhaustion are the same ones who are having to use their carefully rationed energy to get their own voices heard. But more on that and them later. I've cited this review in my description as I reference it a lot in this video, so check it out if you like. But as you can see, there's lots of symptoms here, from chest pains to tinnitus, nausea to irregular menstruation. Different people will have different sets of these symptoms, just like how when you have flu, your symptoms might differ from someone else's. But these are all possibilities that arise with long COVID. They often have a delayed onset too, meaning different symptoms appear at different average lengths of time after the initial COVID infection. And to clarify something from the picture, symptoms are what we feel and report, whereas pathology is what's going on in the body / what you would get diagnosed with. That's why you don't really have immune system or pancreatic symptoms per se, because the patient can't really feel and report changes in these. You know, you won't go to the doctor and say, my immune system feels whack. Whereas you can report fatigue or memory loss or coughing. Now, you might look at this and think, well, we're just taking a load of symptoms and attributing them to this mysterious, big, long COVID. Like, anything that anyone gets after COVID is pulled into the long COVID symptom bracket. But there are explanations for why such a broad range of symptoms can be associated with one disorder. Some of the leading theories of what causes long COVID are to do with systems that exist throughout our body, and that's how one infection can lead to multiple organ effects. Take your immune system, for example. It's there to protect your body from infections and disease, and is made up of this complex network of cells like white blood cells, organs and tissues that control processes throughout your body. Loads of changes in the immune system have been seen in people with long COVID. They're listed in the review paper and include overactive antibody-producing B cells, exhausted T cells which have stopped working properly, elevated levels of immune-associated chemicals called cytokines, just to name a fraction. One of these cytokines, CCL11, is associated with cognitive dysfunction, that is, issues with thinking ability. Now, you don't need to know what all of those kind of individual parts do to realise that the immune system isn't in a good way. And it's the immune system's complexity, its cross-body presence, and the number of changes seen in long COVID that make it a prime suspect for being a cause of the disorder. Another potential cause is viral reservoirs. This is the idea that the SARS-CoV-2 virus from the COVID infection is persisting somewhere in your body. It's like hanging around, either as a replicating entity or as fragments that are triggering your immune system to overreact. In support of this theory, proteins or RNA, which is what the virus uses as genetic code from the SARS-CoV-2 virus, have been found in lots of places around the body, including the reproductive system, the muscles and the brain. And you don't need a lot of the virus to then set up these viral reservoirs, which could explain why long COVID can be triggered by mild infections. Because yeah, a lot of long COVID cases come from mild infections. The third theory is that blood clotting could be connected to long COVID, in particular these things called microclots. Microclots are what they sound like, tiny blood clots, and they're formed when this substance fibrinogen clumps together in a form that's resistant to being dissolved. They can then contribute further to larger clots and the coagulation of your blood. Other blood-related issues that are reported in long COVID include damage to the cells that line your blood vessels, i.e. your arteries and your veins, and deformed red blood cells. So again, with your blood existing throughout your body, these issues could explain how we get multi-organ symptoms. One theory is that these problems stop your blood from transporting oxygen efficiently. Your body needs oxygen to work properly, and so yeah, you can see how that would lead to problems like fatigue. There are other theories that are floating around too, including some related to our bacterial bacterial profiles in our body, dysfunction of your vagus nerve, which is a really important nerve for kind of regulating different functions in your body, and the idea that long COVID is an autoimmune disorder, which is that it is when your own immune system attacks yourself. Auto means self. For any details on any of those theories, I'd recommend taking a look at that review, Kelsa Breeze, that I've linked below. And if you'd like me to go into detail in a particular one on a video, then drop a comment to let me know. These are still theories. It doesn't mean that any of them are correct. Long COVID and its symptoms could be caused by a combination of these things, or, a little bit from each, or something else that we haven't sussed out yet. I mean, you can already tell just from my description there how, like the immune system links to the viral reservoirs, and the immune system also can link to the blood stuff. And so, yeah. But seeing as we've had some theories to go off, have we been able to come up with some potential treatments? Well, unfortunately, there's not tons of research on this. At the moment, the focus is more on treating symptoms, focusing on certain subsets at a time. Examples include eliminating things from your diet for gut issues, low doses of a drug called naltrexone for neuroinflammation, and anticoagulants and blood thinners to try and reduce clotting. Pacing is the most popular treatment for post-exertional malaise, which is basically all about tracking your symptoms, learning your energy patterns, and pacing your activity accordingly. But of course, this isn't a cure, right? There are also diagnostic tools being developed that will hopefully help to give people the legitimacy of a diagnosis. They could also be used to define kind of the type of long COVID people have, something that could be useful with such a broad range of symptoms. Again, there's a summary in that amazing review of the potential symptoms that could be worth exploring, and which have studies that are currently doing so. It's in this chunky table, so take a look at the citation in the description if you want to see more of that. One treatment that's got a fair bit of press though is called blood filtering, which attempts to tackle clotting issues. It's also known as apheresis. Clinics have popped up in Europe that people are travelling to have this done, but the thing is, it isn't proven as a treatment and it's an expensive procedure. But the people going are in desperate situations. There's obviously a lot of frustration amongst those with long COVID with scientists as they're impatient for a treatment. The slow and steady pace of the academic world isn't really matching up to their urgency, and this isn't the only way in which the clinic clashes with the community. There are reports that some people with long COVID are being prescribed something that will make their symptoms worse, namely exercise. When those with post-exertional malaise are going to the doctors complaining of tiredness, it seems like they're sometimes being told to counter it with a steady exercise regime. I guess this is especially the case if the tiredness and down mood is being conflated with depression. But post-exertional malaise is made worse by exerting yourself, so exercise will make it worse and it really shouldn't be prescribed. And the thing is, this is a mistake that's been made before, specifically when treating people with chronic fatigue syndrome or ME. ME, which stands for myalgic encephalomyelitis, and chronic fatigue syndrome or CFS are the same thing. The UK called it ME to start, the US CFS, and now we kind of call it both. It's an illness where people feel profound fatigue, often following a viral or bacterial infection. Sound familiar? Around half of those with long COVID meet the criteria for ME/CFS, and similarities are often drawn between the two. The most obvious is post-exertional malaise, but also there's the microclots and inflammation in the brain and blood vessel problems and thinking issues, and the list does go on, and yes, it is in that review. It's worth noting here that there are various illnesses, post-viral illnesses, that can happen after being infected with the virus. Such as dysautonomia and its subtypes like POTS or POTS. These can also occur in people with long COVID and ME/CFS. They potentially have causal similarities. There's a lot of overlap between them all, and more post-viral illnesses that I've not even mentioned. So this kind of world of overlap is a bit beyond the scope of this video. So I'm just going to focus on ME/CFS when I'm talking, but yeah, there's all these other post-viral illnesses as well that are potentially related. The main thing I want to turn to is another unfortunate similarity between the ME/CFS community and the long COVID community, and that is the feeling that researchers aren't prioritising their needs, aren't really listening to them. Research into long COVID is happening, right? As you can see from that review, I'm obviously not denying that. But the existence of that review is thanks to a patient-led research group, as I said earlier. they're the ones, it seems, primarily pushing for more to be done. So I wanted to take a look at why the research world might clash with the needs of those with real world experience. I'm talking about the broad culture of scientific research here, so hashtag not all scientists, and also the points I make actually can count for various conditions, not just long COVID. So the first issue is shoehorning. Researchers have their own interests, that's fair enough, but it does mean that if they turn their attention to something that's new, like long COVID, potentially because they have some funding to investigate it, they may try and tie said research to their own field and the interests that they've spent their lives pursuing. This means questions about long COVID risk getting contorted to fit pre-existing research agendas. A quick add-on here, I do think that sometimes researchers having pre-existing things that they're interested in can be really beneficial when they turn their attention to a new thing. So like, for example, mRNA vaccines. Scientists had been working on mRNA vaccines before COVID came along, which meant that when COVID did come along, they could turn that technology to the new challenge of COVID. So it can be beneficial. I'm obviously just putting across the negatives also here. Problem 2. Slow timelines. Research timelines in regards to doing everything with the appropriate level of trials, etc., are generally quite slow, especially if funding is limited. This pedantic and thorough nature of research and academia can feel unbearable for patients. Slow timelines do of course exist for their reasons, for thoroughness, etc., but again, I'm just putting across the negative flip side here. 3. Not recognising patient priorities. There can be a fear that scientists who don't include patients in their research can end up chasing agendas that their patients don't actually care about. I'm not saying that research for the pursuit of knowledge's sake doesn't have value, but the subjects of that research would probably rather that knowledge feed into something that will help them out. Issue 4 is homework not being done. I used to work in a school and that just gave me flashbacks. Those 3 previous points I made are all made worse if researchers don't do their homework. I said in point 1 that there'll be some researchers turning their attention to long COVID who are seeing it as something new, but it's important to realise that it isn't really new at all. Its similarities to ME and CFS that I talked about earlier mean that pre-existing ME-CFS research is a great foundation for studying long COVID. But it is a general problem in the world of science that researchers sometimes don't have an awareness of what's going on in other fields. And by fields, I don't just mean biologists don't talk to physicists. I mean people studying one disorder don't necessarily communicate to people studying a differently labelled, but perhaps extremely similar disorder. But if you're not doing this communication, you're massively missing out, because when you do, it can be hugely beneficial. Here's an example, right? Take post-exertional malaise, the depressing hallmark symptom of long COVID and ME/CFS. A study in 2021 on people with long COVID found that whilst oxygen can get into the bloodstream, the problem is that other muscles and organs struggle to extract it and use it. This could explain why people with long COVID get post-exertional malaise, even if their heart and lung tests look normal. So the researchers who found this link found out about it and their attention was drawn to it because they shared an office with people who'd worked on ME and CFS and found the exact same thing. In fact, a lot of the findings that will prove and have already proven useful for long COVID research have come from researching pre-existing post-viral illnesses. The Patient-Led Research Collaborative said this in their review paper. There is a vast collection of biomedical findings in ME/CFS, although these are not well known to researchers and clinicians in other fields, which is formal, but I read it as kind of damning. Not being aware of pre-existing findings is such a waste of time, leading to precious energy and resources going into doing research that's already been done, regenerating an evidence base that already exists. It's like your mate that sends you a meme 6 months after it goes viral, if said mate also thinks they invented the meme. And even worse, it can mean that mistakes get repeated, like prescribing exercise. Mistakes in experimental methods can be perpetuated too, and there's an interesting example related to antibodies. Many experiments related to COVID test whether someone had COVID at some point by seeing if they have COVID antibodies, the things your immune system makes when you're infected with the virus. If you have them, you've had COVID in the past, and if you haven't, you haven't. That's been the general consensus. But then people started coming forward with long COVID, but no COVID antibodies, suggesting they couldn't have developed long COVID because they'd never been infected by short COVID. This then led to the dismissal of people's claims that what they were experiencing was long COVID. It must have been something else because they don't have COVID antibodies. And yet, scientific studies have actually shown that not everyone who gets COVID even generates antibodies. So you could well have long COVID and no COVID antibodies. This therefore would completely change the way by which many of these studies are done, and it was only discovered because someone saw this lack of antibodies as a puzzle to be solved rather than an anomaly to be ignored. Obviously, we need some way to measure things in studies to select who's included, who isn't, but science is complex with theories changing all the time, and that previous example shows the importance in being willing to challenge your pre-existing theories when greeted with new evidence, even if it is a bit of a pain for the research method. But fortunately, there's a great way to keep track of current research across a particular field. Take a look at what the communities of people with lived experience are saying. As the ones with a vested interest in what science is saying about their lives, they often have a great sense of the lay of the land, collating findings in forums and Reddit threads. To ignore the wealth of knowledge these communities have is to miss out on a great way to guide that homework I mentioned earlier. I'm not saying everything in every forum is going to be exactly right or always scientifically sound, but it's a great place to see a lot of evidence together in one place. But this alludes to another source of frustration for people with long COVID, right? How they can be dismissed from academic conversations. Sometimes they can be made to feel that their direct experience isn't valuable, or even that it's the very thing that weakens their input by making them less subjective. But of course, everyone has their own biases, whether you've got something or not, right? This disconnect between the research and real world can be summarised for long COVID in a simple example. Changing the name. I read about this example in Ed Yong's excellent article from 2021 that summarises this patient research atmosphere perfectly, and it's obviously linked below. Long COVID is a name that came from the patient community, but the scientific community put their own stamp on it, calling the disorder post-acute sequelae of SARS-CoV-2 infection. I think sequelae is how you pronounce it, I've never said that out loud. Now, this feels like an odd line of separation, as if academia needed its own name and the original one was inappropriate for professional communication. It's certainly less memorable, and it's not even necessarily more accurate, as we don't know if people with long COVID are post anything. This wall that seems to stand between those who study and those who are the subjects looks starkly familiar to people who've been living with ME or CFS for years. There's a big sense in the ME-CFS community that they really struggle to be heard or believed by medical professionals. This becomes less of a surprise when you hear about stats like this, right? Of 71 accredited US medical schools, only 4 fully teach about ME and CFS and that other post-viral illness I mentioned earlier, dysautonomia. And there's this thing where when someone verbally reports their symptoms, doctors and researchers are going off what they're saying rather than a measurement like blood chemicals or levels of gene expression. This can lead to suspicions that they may be misreporting their own symptoms or simply wrong or not telling the truth. And yet, despite suspicions that people over-report symptoms, there's actually evidence to suggest that the opposite is true. If we use objective or scientific measurements to test cognitive impairment, which is basically just difficulty in thinking, more people are included as having cognitive impairment than if we just measure it using people reporting it as a symptom. Again, hashtag not all doctors, hashtag not all scientists. There are researchers who are making concerted efforts to include people they're studying in their research. There are clinicians who believe their patients, but there are still people like a professor bloke who remained unnamed that my partner heard at a conference who will bemoan the use of methods that involve talking to patients and instead wish that we could just insert a chip into them to accurately measure their state. Depressingly, that is a true quote. So it's been a slight rant, and I even cut this script down quite a lot, but all this evidence means that it's no surprise that the patient-led research collaborative put together that review to summarise everything that already exists. And I see that paper as them kind of turning around to the research world and saying, here's loads of leads, right? We've gathered them, now you go and do science based on them, and hurry up because our lives are being wasted. And a review like this was obviously sought after, both from patients and scientists, because after less than a week of being published, it had 402,000 views and was in the top 0.0016% of 22.9 million tracked papers. So it's pretty popular. Despite the evidence collated here though, some will still doubt that long COVID is a thing. The list of symptoms is too long, too broad a range. Why does it set off so late after infection? How can even a mild infection trigger it? But in my mind, the fact of the matter is this: these symptoms exist. These experiences exist. So there's obviously something there. And if the debate then segues into whether long COVID is physiological in your body or psychological in your head, with an inference that if it's the latter, it's less real, then it ignores that these two things overlap. And it suggests that something psychological is less real, which is problematic, right? Because it's very real to the patients. As for the it's too broad point, I made that argument earlier that the possible mechanisms for long COVID could be the way that one disorder infects systems throughout the body. However, there is the potential that long COVID could be made up of subsets of other disorders, but it's all about how you choose to classify them, and how will we know if we don't study it properly? The diagnostics I mentioned may reveal branches of long COVID we could define, and that could be useful, but we need to give it a decent research focus before we'll know. Right? A lack of research funding and focus isn't a reason to not believe patients when you feel like they're telling you too many symptoms. Much like the antibody thing from earlier, this isn't an anomaly to be ignored, it's evidence to explain. In conclusion, long COVID is a thing, and it's scary. We don't know if it's going away either. There's some evidence that its development will become less common over time as our bodies get more exposed to the virus and get used to coming in contact with it, but we're not sure for now. For those of us who've avoided long COVID, it's easy to think that the impacts of the pandemic are over, but they're not, and we need to have empathy and respect for people who are still at risk or are still suffering with the consequences. And we need to make decisions accordingly, like something as simple as staying home when you're ill. And I mean, if you do get ill, respect it, respect being unwell. What I mean is, for goodness sake, rest. That's basically a note to myself. Full disclosure, I got a bit scared last year. I got labyrinthitis, I made a video about it, but it took me actually a lot longer to fully recover than I thought it would. I had pervasive brain fog and all that jazz. I don't have a regular video upload schedule or anything. I'm not as active as I should be on socials, so it may not look like I work that hard to people who only see me via YouTube, but I'm actually terrible at switching off and having a work-life balance. I just overwork myself and it's been a problem for years. So when I got ill, I wasn't resting. It was only when a friend who was urging me to rest likened the experience I was describing to what her friend with ME was saying her experience was like when she developed ME, that the penny dropped, that I should really calm down. So yeah, if you're ill, rest. I want to end this video by shouting out groups like the Patient-Led Research Collaborative and podcasts like The Rest Room for carrying the weight of communication and spreading the word. In summary, I think for long COVID we need research that builds on existing knowledge and is inclusive of patient experience, training and education for those in research and healthcare workforces, public communication campaigns reminding people that long COVID does exist, robust policies to help people with it, and funding to support research and care. And to be honest, the same tenets should be followed for other areas of research, not just long COVID. And that's my manifesto. End scene. Researching this video has just made me so interested in those with lived experience who feel unheard by research. I'm so angry for them, to be honest. So I hope I've done a useful / good job in this mammoth for me video. If you have any experiences related to this video, do share them below in a comment and check out the resources linked if you want to. Please do like this video if you like it, share if you share it, subscribe if you subscribe it, and media my socials if you want to do that. And otherwise, all that's left to say is thank you so much for watching, have a lovely day, and remember, keep being empathetic to others. I feel like that should be simple, but it often isn't. Huge thank you to my patrons for sticking by me despite my haphazard upload schedule. I appreciate your support, with a special shout out to Druv, Angela and Puslius. Half an hour, it's a bit much, isn't it? You don't really need any outtakes. Does anyone watch the outtakes? Comment below if you watch the outtakes, because sometimes I think about getting rid of them. I've had pins and needles in my leg for the last 20 minutes. Did I say 20 minutes? I meant 2 hours. I don't have any abs, but it's just because I don't do any sit-ups. Abs is short for antibodies, guys. It's funny. I'm gonna get addicted to this. I really am. Do, do, do. Come on and do the conga. I feel like I haven't heard a jazz cover of the conga. That would be good. Okay, I'm going. Bye.